Well, if you really care about Palestinians and you're a progressive, then you voted for Harris. You just don't care about Palestinians that much. You're not really connected to
Yeah.
the issue
Well,
that
hey,
much.
I hope you get all of the Destiny subscribers that you're going for, man. Have a
I don't
good
even know who
night.
Destiny is.
Got other
Get off the
callers
internet. Get off the
in
internet.
the
Get off the
queue.
internet. You're on the internet way too much. You got to care about real people. Get
Later,
off the
Jolah.
internet.
Yeah, I just was doing a little bit of phone banking for Jill Stein in the few days before the election,
Yeah.
and I had a lot of interesting conversations with voters around the Dearborn area in Michigan. So I'm happy to talk about that. Um, Happy to talk about some thoughts I had about the 2016 and 2020 Democratic primaries and how that the results of those might or may not have translated into this election. But yeah, since I'm not super familiar with you. What's kind of your, I mean, I heard the last, I don't know, let's say 15, 20 minutes. Um, so I was hearing that you thought that a vibes-based approach would have been a better strategy for Kamala. I heard you say a few things that I agree with, which would be that Kamala is not a great candidate to run if you're trying to win the election versus Trump. Um, but yeah, I mean, what are you most interested to talk about? I didn't hear the beginning, so if there's stuff you've already covered, we can just skip that.
Yeah, so I'm a notorious Jill Stein hater. So I've made many videos hating on Jill Stein, and everything that she does politically. Not everything she stands for, but hating everything she does.
Hmm.
And I've commented on her not being effective, and campaigning for very weird reasons. I don't like how much of the conversation was dominated by just trying to make Kamala lose, and I don't like that she wasn't working. I mean, I know there's coalitions within the party trying to get the Democratic administration to change positions on Palestine, but I don't like how the Green Party was not working closely with those organizations and talking more about the goal
You
being
like the
changing policy
uncommitted?
versus yeah, I like that approach more, where it's like we're getting this support to try and make fundamental changes with those who are going to be in power. I don't like the whole mentality of we're just trying to like punish Democrats, which is what I felt like dominated the campaign in the later stages.
I guess I would say that we're going to punish Democrats for, you know, closely aiding and abetting a genocide is a pretty good way to put pressure on them to change their behavior from an outside of the two party system perspective. I wouldn't say that that was like just kind of pissing and moaning just to make small internet waves. I think that that's based on how major things like abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, and the New Deal happened. They all happened because of outside pressure, and eventually one of the two major parties adopted the position of the people who were the outside agitators to avoid losing power and legitimacy.
Well, there is some truth to organizing outside of party structures. I definitely agree there is some evidence of that, but
Not
I
even
also would say
outside of
that
party structure, like
even like
small
civil
third
rights
parties.
movement, there's a good speech for like the March on Washington, I believe, where John Lewis was going to come out and be like very, 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 very aggressive to the current administration for not going nearly far enough on civil rights. But many of the leaders said like, hey, like rewrite this speech because we're being really pragmatic about this. We cannot go after the administration because we're trying to have a deal with the administration where they do, X and Y if we're able to, you know, yeah, promise support for them essentially. So there has been shown evidence of organizing, causing noise, and also then working within the party to move the party. But right now, I feel like the Green Party was disconnected from movements that were doing that. I never heard Jill Stein say once, if Democrats do this, then I will, endorse them. There was no. If I talk to Kyle Kalinske, for
Ralph
example,
Nader did that in the 2000 election. Ralph Nader said to um, Al Gore that, pick three of my 10 top policies, and if you adopt three of them, I will drop out and instruct all of my supporters to vote for you. And he
yeah, if
didn't
Jill
do
Stein
it.
would have done that, that would have been great. I just thought no attempts
But
at
if
that, and
but
it's
if
just
that strategy had been tried by her party by a more effective head of the party than her in years past, and the Democrats refused, understand why try that strategy
2000
again.
in the year 2000, 24 years ago, and that's even more of the argument of the Green Party was going to do this role in the election regardless of the Palestine conflict arising from October 7th. They were here in 2016 saying to vote third party, 2020 to vote third party. They're here every single election to say it to vote third party because their main issue
Well,
is
I'm
kind of
not
like seeing
a
the institutions
big
fall
Green
apart.
Party
They don't
supporter.
really. Yeah, but that's what I mean. They come around to have more fragmentation in the process because they are ultimately like Brianna Joy Gray. They're very accelerationist in a sense that if Democrats lose and things get bad enough, they believe that people will eventually turn towards more progressive solutions. At least that's what all their rhetoric suggests. That's something I never really believed in.
I don't think. Oh, I don't really believe in that either. But I also don't believe in supporting the Democrats as an alternative to accelerationism.
Yeah,
But I
that's
would say
fine,
that
but
I
yeah.
think that the Green Party's calculus was, Trump is pretty unpopular across the country. Biden and Kamala are pretty unpopular across the country. We're unlikely to appeal to Trump voters successfully. So we'll try to really hammer the Democrats. It seems to me that that was their calculus, and I don't think that the Green Party is um, terribly effective at very much, except for fighting the legal battles to stay on the ballot. They're constantly under fire legally from the Democratic Party, trying to kick them off of ballots in all 50 states. And they kind of just perpetually, the last 12 years or so, are just spinning their wheels trying to stay on the ballot.
Well,
Um,
there are multiple
but
Senate
I
and
didn't.
House races where the Green Party did help Democrats lose, so they were successful in some races. Like Bob Casey, for example, if there's no Green Party candidate, he definitely wins. And there's a few races in California. So they were
I mean,
successful
are there?
knocking some Democrats out for
You
Republicans.
must have seen exit polls from 2016 though, where Jill Stein voters said if Jill Stein was not in the race, I just wouldn't have voted. That was the vast majority.
Yeah, but the gap was huge. It was like a 15,000 vote difference, and the Green Party candidate got like 70 or 80,000 votes. So there's a good chance
Yeah, but
it at least would have been.
that's assuming a quarter or a third of those voters would have voted for the Democrats
There's a
instead had there
chance.
not been a Green Party candidate, and I just don't think that that's likely.
Well, I think there'd be a chance for that. But another thing too is there's no evidence that anything changed as a result of Jill Stein, and the only thing that we know was going to happen if Donald Trump beat Kamala, we knew for a guarantee millions more will die. We know that millions more will die now than more will die under Trump than died
Do we?
under if Kamala would have won. 100%.
But in the
Trump is
Middle
saying to go
East?
further. Yes, 100% for Palestinians. Trump saying we
Yeah.
should
I
go
mean,
further and supply more weaponry, and this is at the same time where the International Criminal Court finally has something out for Netanyahu, and
what
now
more
we have
weaponry?
countries like Canada coming out and saying we'll even abide to it if Netanyahu comes here, we're going to arrest him. Kamala Harris could have easily been in position to shift policy for America on that behalf. But now Mike Huckabee is going to be the ambassador to Israel, someone who believes in the end times theory for Israel and thinks that
Well,
Jewish
this
people need to control the
don't
entire Middle
support
East. And
any
Trump
of
has said we need to
I
go
don't
further.
support anybody in the Republican Party.
Trump says we need to remove
And
all
I
restrictions
really
on
came on
Israel.
here. I'm happy to talk about what might be some quantitative differences between
Yes,
Trump and
millions more
Biden
people
or
dying.
Trump and Kamala
Trump
in
means millions more die in
particularly
America
in
and outside
Israel
of America.
Palestine.
Also in
Well, okay,
America,
that's great.
mass deportations
I'm happy to tackle that issue, but I came
Affordable
on here
Care
to
Act.
discuss primarily some of the conversations that I had with voters in Dearborn area just right before this election. I told you already I'm not really a supporter of the Green Party, so I guess I'm kind of getting caught up in like quibbling over some of your statements about, past precedent for this election and how to read events of history
Well,
in relation to
even in
what's
this
just
election,
happened
just
this
really quick,
election.
and I want to go into that, but before we get into that, just my biggest issue as well: Trump versus Harris. We're at all-time high union approval. Trump will be the most anti-union president after Biden was the most pro-union president. We just had Biden with immigration work with a bunch of other countries that have a more humane immigration system that also reduced border crossings, working with other countries so they have processes
Yeah,
to help us
so
process
so I
our
live in
claimies. And
Mexico currently, My wife
And
is a
but
Mexican
let me just go through
citizen,
the different
and
policies with Trump. Trump wants to bring back the stay in
you're
Mexico. He
saying
wants to do
nice
mass
like
deportations. He wants to do mass
boilerplate stuff.
deportations. No, okay. Let me go through the actual policies. He wants to do mass
Sure.
deportations. They're talking
Okay.
about denaturalization. They're talking about opening camps to handle these mass deportations of mostly, by far, mostly, very, very non-violent, undocumented immigrants who just want to live in America and work their jobs and they have a family here. The Affordable Care Act, if Donald Trump can effectively remove that, 40 million people will lose their health insurance, and probably 100 million more will lose patient protections if the Affordable Care Act is gone. And that's not even talking about the mass destruction, mass deportations, and the ACA will cause, combined with not only domestically, but the millions of people who are not immigrants, who are just non-white, who will now be targeted by the Trump administration. And also, in Palestine, millions more are guaranteed to die now, and there is no platform. Advocacy for Palestinians in America is now completely dead because Trump won. It still would have been alive,
I would
and
say
millions of lives would
advocacy
still
for
have a chance to
Palestine
be
was
alive if
probably
Harris
more
was in
dead
the
from,
presidency. That's just not
college
true.
administrations having cops come in and crack the heads of
We're
protesters
talking
on
about
campuses.
Israel. We're talking about policies towards Israel. Mike Huckabee versus whoever
We
Kamala
just
would have
brought
put
up
in
like
charge of that
6
would have been
other policies.
vastly different.
I'm happy to address any of them.
But denying
would
that
you
there's
like
any
to stay with
if you're
Israel-Palestine?
just writing off, no, this is the issue with Green Party voters. You're writing off this as a qualitative difference or a quantitative
I said
difference between Trump and
quantitative.
Harris. Quantitative,
No,
okay,
I said I'm
that's
happy
even
to
worse.
talk about
You're
what
writing it off
some
as a
quantitative
quantitative
differences
issue, okay?
might be.
And it's
I'm
just,
not writing. I think you've
we
misheard
know
what I
for a
said.
fact.
I said I'm
We know
happy
for
to
a
talk
fact that
about what
Trump.
Jolah. I think you misheard what I said. I said I'm happy to talk about what could be some quantitative differences between Trump and Biden with regards to the current war in the Middle East that we're participating in. But that I'm not a longtime Green Party supporter. It's something that I decided to do for this election. It is not like I'm not riding on the Green Party to make a huge comeback in the next 4, 8, or any number of years. So I am happy to talk about any of these issues, including Israel-Palestine. But I wondered if you wanted to hear about the specific conversations that I had with voters in the Dearborn, Michigan area, which was a huge kind of linchpin swing state area for this election.
Yeah. I would love to hear your reasoning for supporting the Green Party as well. What your main goals were, because there is no foundational evidence that would have helped literally anyone. There is no evidence, historical or right now,
voting
that
for
voting Green would have
Democrats is
helped
going to help
anyone.
Palestinians.
Yeah, it keeps
Like
advocacy
just
alive.
taking the Israel-Palestine. That's going to help
Yeah,
Palestinians if I
being able
vote for
to
the party
legally
that's currently lifting
protest.
weapons to the people killing them on a weekly basis.
The party at least willing to talk to Palestinian activists. Yes, it would have been much better than Trump, who wants to. He calls anyone who supports Palestinians Hamas. He uses Palestine as a slur. He wants to deport anyone that supports Palestine, and he wants Israel to have zero restrictions. He wants Israel to go further with what they're doing in Gaza. And his administration, Jared Kushner, his stepson, has talked about using Gaza property as oceanfront property. You're really not letting any clear distinction be had here, because you're just saying genocide is genocide. You're making that type of argument without looking at any of the actual differences in foreign policy between Trump and Harris.
You're throwing 6 different issues at me every time I try to respond to one before I even really get a sentence out. So here's my take on Israel-Palestine escalation between administrations. I feel like the biggest single block to Israel escalating more against the Palestinians is not whether or not they can get more weapons from the United States. They've gotten an enormous amount of weapons from the United States. They've dropped enormous quantities of that ordnance on Palestinians and Lebanese, and they're going to continue doing that regardless who won the election. But I think the biggest real block on what they're doing is the other militarized powers in the region. They can't really invade Lebanon. They lost in 2006 when Hezbollah was much weaker than they are now. They have not eradicated Hamas despite dropping, I believe, more, quite a bit more tonnage of bombs than either the Hiroshima or Nagasaki nuclear bombings in World War II onto Gaza. And they still haven't rooted out Hamas, which is their stated war aim. And they're certainly not going to be able to do that with Hezbollah or much less Iran. Even if the United States gets involved, I mean, we've seen the United States ship an enormous amount of.
Directly with Palestine, though, You don't think
versus
there's any
Russia. So
difference
I'm just
between the
not
Trump
really
administration
sure.
and Harris on Palestine and Gaza, just on Gaza alone?
I
You don't
you
think there's a
you
difference?
you cut off you cut off a little bit. What was the first part of what you said?
On Gaza alone, do you think there's a difference between Harris and Trump on Gaza alone?
Rhetorically, there's a huge difference.
Rhetorically, you
I
don't think
don't
there's any
really see.
policy difference between Harris and Biden on Gaza, or Harris and Trump? You don't think there's
Well,
any difference between Harris
like
and
you're
Trump on?
saying, he's gonna let Israel go all the way. I think that would suppose the Democrats have actually tried to stop Israel from doing anything in the past year. What is it? 13 months now. I don't think the United States. Huh?
Well, you're breaking up. Your microphone's breaking up.
Jolah, is he breaking up for you too, or is it just me?
My
Yeah,
whole stream's
it's
breaking up for
right now.
a second. 1 second. Let me
It is not just.
Is that any better?
1 second. It should be good now. My stream was probably lagging because
Better
my
connection?
Ethernet came out. My Ethernet cable came out for a second, so I have to readjust it to a wired connection again. Can you hear me okay now, though?
Is that any better?
I don't know why it's still lagging. Is the stream lagging?
Sounds like it's good now.
Okay, yeah, my Ethernet cable came out, so I jumped on Wi-Fi, so I'm back on the Ethernet, so we should be good now.
I thought that was my connection.
Yeah, I kick it out sometimes.
Yes. So you were basically saying that there's going to be a huge material difference between Biden's previous 4 years and Trump's next 4 years with regards to Israel-Palestine. But I just am not really sure that there actually is a lot more weaponry-wise that the United States could give Israel. They've already dropped an enormous amount of ordnance on Gaza and increasingly on the West Bank, and have not achieved their war aims. Israel already has nuclear weapons, so in which the U.S. helped them get in the first place. So I'm just not really sure, like, what more could Trump even possibly do besides rhetorically support them? I mean, the United States has already covered for them at every diplomatic forum from the UN on down, and exerted quite a bit of leverage to prevent the ICC warrants that you were mentioning a bit ago. So I just don't really know.
Okay,
like,
so for example, one huge
what
point
more could be done.
Biden's administration, even among Democrats, is uniquely pro-Israel and uniquely pro-Israel in terms of what they do in Gaza. For example, Biden's presidency was far to the right of where Kamala expressed she would be and where Kamala's advisors are. And where Kamala's family is known to be, just as far as who Kamala would have been when it comes to Palestine and Israel. And there's been many stories about Harris expressing concern about Biden being way too pro-Israel, and literally not caring about, or not caring, but not putting any restrictions on what they are doing. But the Biden administration still wanted to be a mediator in a two-state solution, and they were explicitly expansionist. So they did not want Israel to keep on expanding their settlements. You can say they didn't do enough. You could say whatever about them, and I would agree with a lot of those criticisms. But there's a good chance now, especially since the International Criminal Court is coming down on a certain side, that this administration could have at least been a mediator in a possible two-state solution someday, or at least reduced some harm to total number of people that were killed in Palestine. And also, in America, under Trump, it might not be safe to protest on behalf of the cause of Palestinians now. It would have been safe to protest 100% under Kamala Harris. Okay, and another thing is, Trump is actively pro-expansion. Trump is the right to. Okay, you're gonna find out really quick that Donald Trump wanted to shoot protesters and was told no by his old generals that are all gone now. Trump wanted to shoot protesters
I was
in his
shot
first few
out
years.
by police while protesting under the first Trump administration. I was also shot at by police protesting under the Obama administration.
Trump wanted that to be official policy where you shoot every protester that's causing a problem. And instead, they decided to tear gas them. But people will see on the ground, even right now, the difference on college campuses.
Tear gas is a chemical weapon banned by the Geneva Convention. I don't see the big leap.
They smoked them out, okay? So the big issue here is even among universities right now, colleges, there's a bunch of letters being sent out fearing repercussions from the current administration cracking down on the ability for students to protest. That's one huge concern among educators, among college students in general, because Trump's
You're talking
DOJ
about the
is going to
upcoming
go.
Trump administration.
Yes, I'm talking about the upcoming Trump administration being uniquely terrible for protesting in America, and Trump being pro-expansionist, having Mike Huckabee be the ambassador to Israel, telling Israel to go full throttle on wiping out everyone from Gaza with zero humanitarian concerns and zero ability to organize in America in a meaningful way. That's the issue with Harris versus Trump. It's just like a complete shift, even if you don't agree with where Harris would have been or where Biden was, which Biden was uniquely bad for a Democrat. But if you don't agree with where Harris is, Trump is still miles and miles and miles worse. But that's okay if you're like, oh, there's no huge difference between the two. That's just not true.
Well, no,
if you
I'm
talk
not
about
saying
like just raw weapons, that's not the big thing at play. The influence the U.S. has is the big thing. The influence the U.S. has in being connected to Israel is probably the biggest concern.
Right. So how has the U.S. used its influence under Biden's administration to stop Israel from doing any of the crimes that they've been doing with our weaponry?
Even strongly encouraging them not to do it, even making like these statements disavowing any parts of it is still better than encouraging Israel to move forward. So they have.
Well, what's better, a wolf or a wolf in sheep's clothing?
You're
Jolah?
using all of these vague terms. Okay, being
I'm asking
anti-expansionist
specific questions.
and even trying to facilitate deals for a two-state solution is still a platform to work from where there are possible solutions to be had. Trump eliminates the possibility of a solution. If you gave up already and you said, okay, it's a done deal, Palestinians are all going to die, if that was your like solution a few months ago and your position a few months ago, then that's fine. But at least under Harris, regardless of your opinion, you could be the most radical person in the world, but even under Harris, it would have been a situation where there is a chance to organize to support Palestinians and organize to draw more sympathy and more public support for the Palestinian cause, especially now, like I said, the ICC came out for Netanyahu and talking about him being a war criminal officially. That would have been a very strong platform to advocate for Harris to switch positions on that from the Biden administration. They don't love this war either. These politicians don't want to deal with that on the Democratic side. But now we're going to have a bunch of people in charge who are going to actively tell Israel, yes, expand. Yes, claim back the Holy Land. That is a huge difference in policy. And there's going to be no mediation on a two-state solution. This administration will actively stand in the way of a two-state solution, and no protesting or anything is going to be able to change anything under the next 4 years. So yeah, now the situation is completely hopeless.
Let me ask you a couple of questions. What do you think giving a strong statement to Israel did materially for the Palestinians over the past 13 months? Do you think that was effective, or do you think that the Biden administration was basically doing that for public relations benefit?
Yes, I think Biden's bad on this. I think Biden's definitely bad on this. He's uniquely bad on this. He's uniquely bad on this.
Another question would be, do you think that past behavior or rhetoric are better predictors of future behavior? Because, I mean, you said that Kamala has said all of these things. Oh, did we lose? Are you still there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because, like, yeah, Kamala has said she wants to be better on Palestine than Trump wanted to be. She said that she has, there's, distance between her position and Biden's position on Palestine. But she, did absolutely nothing at all while vice president.
She was vice president.
To stop
it. She couldn't have done it. There's nothing functionally.
Yeah, she's the second most powerful person in the country.
She's really not. The vice president is not the second most powerful person by default.
She could have been making these statements. Even if she was all she was going to do is make statements. She could have been making
make statements against the Biden admin, by the way.
From
She did make
day one,
statements. She did make radical
when
statements,
the
but she made some
election
changes.
Seemed like it was clearly going to be affected by.
Because she more aggressively called for a ceasefire than Biden ever did, and also refused to say that Netanyahu was an ally. She refused to say that. She went more against Netanyahu and Israel than Biden ever did during her campaign. She did not do a full call for a weapons embargo, but she did make an aggressive call for a ceasefire that Biden never did.
Okay,
even
but
her
then how do
you
combine that with the same information that she has also said simultaneously during her campaign, that the U.S. would never stop supporting Israel as an ally?
Because
regardless of
Israel
what
is
you said
still
about
very popular among
Netanyahu.
voters. Israel is still very popular with voters, and that's probably a huge thing.
Right. So all this
Yeah.
rhetoric is to message to voters. It's not affecting
But she's
Israel's
also
behavior.
known to be very anti-Blinken. I'm just saying what is said from insiders within the campaigns of what discontent was had within the Biden White House. Also, Harris's shift in rhetoric from Biden was pretty stark when it comes to calling for a ceasefire and not saying Netanyahu was an actual ally. And also just Democrats not going to when Netanyahu came to speak in front of Congress, so many Democrats not going to that, protesting that as well. There were the grounds in place where enough organizing could have pressured the Harris campaign to act in a much different way once in office than Biden did act. But Biden handicapped this entire campaign on many of these issues. But the point is, Kamala, I want to go. We could talk about the Dearborn stuff, and then I want to talk to a couple of these other people as well. But the big point I have is under Harris, there were some signs that she'd be better than Biden. Biden was uniquely bad on this issue. Activism and, organizing around this topic had a chance to save some lives in Palestine and in Gaza specifically. And under Donald Trump, all of those opportunities to organize and have activism are gone. And now not only are they gone, but in America, there will be even more. All of our activist focuses, all of those focuses will now need to be on mass deportations and the ACA being overturned and the right to protest being blocked and people getting deported for even being associated with being pro-Palestine or Trump calling to go against the Constitution to put people in jail for flag burning and Trump calling on militias to take care of the job for him if the military doesn't listen to him. And also state police can do certain things when there's protests. The federal government with federal agents were very different under Trump. We never saw protesters from the federal agents to this extent being put in unmarked vans, and Trump from federal agents wanting to shoot protesters in the leg as an official policy. And if I mean, maybe that'll come to fruition, maybe it won't. But the big issue is all this activism that could have been focused on Palestine and making healthcare better in America is now focused to defending immigrants, defending healthcare, and also defending basic rights in America and basic rights for Black and brown people in America. And if we can't even get people to be sympathetic in America for Black and brown people, there's no way Americans are going to care about Palestinians. Now, especially since all of the efforts are going to be defending issues here in America and protecting the foundation of democracy in general. Now, every single focus and progressive focus needs to be put on the back burner in government just to protect basic rights in America. That's the whole thing here. Kamala gave a chance. Trump wiped away every chance. The only way Trump's presidency was beneficial is if you believed in accelerationist ideologies, which is why every accelerationist I know that has any following in media was extremely pro Jill Stein, including... yeah. All right.
So was that
love to hear
basically
your-
like closing arguments on
That's my main
Israel
issue
Palestine?
with that. I think it's like open shut. Like
Would you mind if
that,
I took a couple of seconds
like there's some nuance
just
in
to
there,
kind of give
but
my
but
closing statement there?
in there the most you can say to that is that you disagree that one would have been better than the other, both would have been bad. That's the only thing you can say, which is just like I would say is just
Well,
like,
that's a straw man. There's a lot of other things I could say.
So how do we
I
pull
would
the
say
stick
that-
out of their ass?
The stick out of our ass. Okay.
There.
I don't really know what you mean, but yeah, I guess I would say that if you're concerned about the right to protest or whether or not protesting could sway one administration versus the other, there were some of the largest protests in recent years, certainly the last couple of decades, for anti-war purposes. I think the largest since the anti-Iraq war protests, and they were in a coordinated fashion with federal direction and assistance, shut down violently by police all across the country. Just now under the Biden administration with Harris as vice president. I see no reason
wait, shut
to
down violently?
believe that would be different.
Which
if
protests were
Harris
shut
was-
down? Which ones were shut down violently by the White House? Which ones were?
Oh, dozens
Which
of
protests?
campus
Which ones are we talking about? Which cases are we talking about?
protests.
Which campus protests by students were shut down by the federal government? Which ones?
Columbia University
So Columbia
of
was shut down by the
Washington,
federal government.
all of them.
Washington was shut down by the federal government from the president.
I said with assistance and coordination from the federal government,
state
yes.
police. These were state
With
police
assistance
and large groups in these large amounts of these
Yeah.
groups were not even students.
But you know
these were
that-
state police.
but you do
These were
know
not the federal
that
government
lo-
agents.
You do know
Don't
that
conflate the two.
local law enforcement agencies, Jolah, you do know that local law
they work
enforcement
with the
agencies are
universities.
constantly
They work
coordinating
with
with
the
each other,
universities.
especially when they consider that, especially when they consider that something to be a potential terror threat or something that they could label.
The state governments led by the governors working with the universities did this. So you're talking about a crackdown from federal agents massively and violently shutting down protests. That did not happen from the Biden administration even, which again is going to be worse than what Harris would have been.
Well, when you were talking about in the 2020 protests, people
both
getting
sides of
thrown
them.
into unmarked vans, I saw a bunch of that happen, and that was being done by local police as well. Just because it had encouragement from the president doesn't make it different than what we're talking about now. But anyways, I guess I'll try and wrap up my closing remarks, see if I can get through them.
No, because you're saying things that just aren't true, and that just
Well,
don't
you
have
just
a basis
spent
in
like
reality.
3 minutes repeating. I'm not, Jolah.
If you
spent
voted
like
Jill
3
Stein, you
minutes
do not know what
recapping your
reality
previous
is with policy
points
or government.
Or
I'm
saying,
sorry.
let's move on to the next thing. You're a real smart guy, Joel. Do you want to hear about what the people said in Dearborn or no?
I definitely would love to hear what the people said in Dearborn. I definitely would love to. No, I don't want to hear you just repeat. No, I don't want to hear you repeat talking points equivocating these two things. Talk about the Dearborn.
Well, you did it. You got to close that segment with your listeners hearing you repeat all your refrains, your chorus again, and then you don't want me to repeat my points by ending that portion of the debate and moving on to this talk about Dearborn. I guess that's fine. It's your show.
We'll revisit that topic in a year from now, and we'll talk about how protesting is different. Because I'm seeing right now, I actually work in this area. I'm seeing all throughout the country right now the crackdowns that are being had as a direct result of the Trump administration using the DOJ to crack down on universities, and also saying that they just passed the designation through Congress, and hopefully it does not pass the Senate, that can label nonprofits that support terrorist organizations as terrorist supporting organizations based off no evidence, because it's already against the law to
Yeah, I
support.
saw that.
Yeah, that's also a really bad thing that the Trump administration would be enforcing that the Biden or Harris administration would not.
You don't think they would enforce that if it was passed under their administration?
They would not sign that into. I guarantee you, they would not sign that into law. 190 Democrats voted against it. Guarantee you, Biden and Harris do not sign that into law. It does get signed into law under Trump. Yep, 200 Democrats in the House are against it. 100%.
Wow, that's a lot of
vetoed it. 100%. Okay, talk about the perspective.
Well, then what's the difference? It's not going to pass.
Because Trump's going to sign it into law because he's going to be president.
Dozens of different voters. Do you want to talk about Dearborn now?
Yeah.
Okay, I talked to dozens of different voters around the Dearborn area for a couple of days before the election. The caller program that we were using was specifically, targeting more calls towards neighborhoods that have a really high Muslim population. And most of them, to my surprise, actually had already voted for Trump in early voting.
Okay.
So these are people that, that understood that Trump had enacted a Muslim ban in his first administration, that understood that he was extremely pro-Israel in his first administration. And I really think that the motivation, from what I could gather from what they told me, is that they're just unwilling to vote for anybody who is actively committing this genocide. And so if it came to 2028 and Trump's successor was coming up, and he continues the genocide, as I'm sure he will, they wouldn't vote for him in 2028. I don't think that most of them had heard of any other candidates in the race. That Jill Stein was not the only candidate on the ballot in Michigan that was against the genocide. It seemed like most of them hadn't heard of her, or they had actually, in their discussions politically before the lead up to the election, had thought, well, Jill Stein might be saying some nice things, but Trump is saying he would end the conflict in Israel-Palestine on day one, or he's just not Biden-Harris. He's just not the person who has just now been committing this genocide for the past 12, 13 months. So we're just going to vote for whoever is not that person. and Michigan was a key swing state. And I just think that it was foolish for the Democrats to think that they could say things that sound nice about Israel-Palestine while having done tangibly nothing to stop Israel from doing what it's doing. I mean, you mentioned like strongly worded remarks, but I feel like this was a huge issue in the election just because of how high the Muslim population is in Michigan, and because it was so clear how angry they were with Biden and Kamala over this issue. I think it was very foolish to say, well, we're going to support a two-state solution. I don't really like what Israel's been doing. We're going to have some more strong talks with them. I think it would have required tangible action for them to win this election. They would have had to actually stop the weapons flow to Israel. They would have had to actually, for instance, force Israel to comply with the International Court of Justice injunctions that they instructed Israel, for instance, not to invade Rafah, things like this. They basically just said, well, Israel has a month, which conveniently landed after the election. Israel has a month to stop starving North Gaza, or we might cut off, and they have to let in a certain threshold of aid, or you might cut things off. Like if they had actually done something instead of saying we're just going to have another stern talk with Israel, if they'd actually done something tangible, I think that would have had a much bigger impact on the election than
I disagree completely.
Trying to lean into vibes. Well, if you think about the Electoral College's impact,
well, voting against Harris and Biden was vibes.
Is a huge part.
It was vibes, and I understand. I definitely understand if someone's personally affected by it, or if they have family, or if they're very close to the issue, just being able to, or just not being able to vote in general. I completely understand that, but supporting or voting for Trump is completely unacceptable. I don't care what has happened. And it's not only unacceptable, but if you do that, there's a good chance you're probably lied to about Donald Trump's record on the Middle East. They probably lied about like the Abraham Accords. They probably lied about other things as well. I don't think Biden and Harris being better on this topic helps them win the election. If anything, maybe in that very small population, and just from an electoral perspective, not talking about the issue itself. That small population,
way oversized impact on the election because of the Electoral College.
They lost by like 200,000 votes in Pennsylvania, so it wouldn't have mattered at all. They probably would have lost more votes overall from people.
Well, of course, it's not the only issue. Of course, it affects Pennsylvania less than Michigan. I didn't talk to voters in Pennsylvania.
I know, but if voters are being lied to the extent where if they would have voted Jill Stein, I might even agree with you a little bit. But the fact they voted for Donald Trump of all people,
well, some of them
they were lied to, and probably I know. Okay, please give me a second.
A lot of them,
they were definitely
a lot more of them voted for Trump.
Chill. They were propagandized to the point to vote for Trump. That means they were so far down a rabbit hole of disinformation. I don't know if anything could have changed their mind if they voted for Donald Trump, because that is such a radical change from reality and a radical disconnect from reality. I don't think anything Biden or Harris could have done would have, changed what these voters would have said. And if it would have changed, it would have took it from 40% Trump vote to 20% maybe, and that would have been a few thousand votes. It would not have swung any election. They probably would have lost overall votes if they would have came out really hard against Israel from really dumb voters that are also just looking off of vibes that are pro-Israel. But and voters
you were talking
are very
about
pro-Israel.
The young voters and the independent voters coming out of very low numbers in this election, having a huge impact. I feel like with young voters in particular, the Israel-Palestine issue, we are far more pro-Palestine than pro-Israel across every demographic in younger voters. So I feel like
every demographic didn't come out by a decent percentage. There's other factors at play.
Yeah, of course, there's other issues.
Because if you really care about Palestinians as well, if you really care about Palestinians and you're a progressive, then you voted for Harris. You just don't care about Palestinians that much. You're not really connected to the issue.
Well, hey, I hope you get all of the Destiny subscribers that you're going for, man. Have a
I don't
good
even know
night.
who Destiny is.
Got other callers.
Get off the internet. Get off the internet. Get off the internet. You're on the internet way too much. You got to care about real people.
Later, Jolah.